In politics, you're allowed to collude. So they colluded, and actually I was happy because it shows how weak they are. It shows how pathetic they are.
Next on Newsmax Prime, Cruz and Kasich team up to try and stop Trump. A masterstroke of strategy or a sign of desperation? Then, pursuing Planned Parenthood. What are the facts? Marsha Blackburn updates us on the work of her House Select Committee. Plus, our prime focus all this week, the apocalypse. Tonight in part one, Johnny Moore on Christian persecution. Are we seeing signs of the end times? Of course, our time together tonight is just beginning as Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening and welcome to the Monday night edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, pro wrestling or politics? Inside the ring of televised grappling, it's called a tag team. Inside the GOP's battle of presidential ambitions, it's called an alliance. As Miranda Kahn reports, now Ted Cruz and John Kasich are coordinating their campaigns in an effort to dump Donald Trump.
JD, critics of this newly formed alliance between Senator Cruz and Governor Kasich say this teaming up shows signs of desperation. Donald Trump spoke about it earlier today at a rally in Rhode Island, one of the East Coast primary states with delegates up for grabs tomorrow.
You know, if you collude in business, or if you collude in the stock market, they put you in jail. But in politics, because it's a rigged system, because it's a corrupt enterprise, in politics, you're allowed to collude. So they colluded, and actually I was happy because it shows how weak they are. It shows how pathetic they are. It takes two longtime politicians, right? Too long to beat, except they're way behind. If you add up the both votes and if you add up the both delegates, they're way behind me, so it doesn't matter. But it takes two guys, longtime politicians, to try and get together to try and beat Trump, and yet they're way behind.
And Trump also continued his railing against what he calls a rigged system after Senator Cruz walked away with more delegates than he should have from Maine over the weekend. Meanwhile, for his part, Cruz spoke earlier in Indiana, one of the states Governor Kasich is vacating, and the senator said that he expected the frontrunner to whine when he heard the news, then added this.
It is big news today that John Kasich has decided to pull out of Indiana to give us a head-to-head contest with Donald Trump. That is good for the men and women of Indiana. It's good for the country to have a clear and direct choice. After discussions with the Kasich campaign, we made a decision about allocating resources. We decided to allocate our time and energy and resources on the state of Indiana. Governor Kasich decided to allocate his resources elsewhere. I think that made sense from both campaigns.
Although promising to act more presidential, Mr. Trump continued attacking Senator Cruz as Lying Ted and took aim at Governor Kasich by nicknaming him 1 for 41 in reference to the number of states Kasich has won compared to how many in which he's actually competed. As for tomorrow night's so-called East Coast primaries, Mr. Trump once again looks to take the lion's share of delegates, possibly adding to the perception of desperation or on the part of his two opponents. JD, back to you.
Thanks, Miranda. For more on this story, we're pleased to be joined by our panel. First, Skyping in from Utica, New York, pollster John Zogby of Zogby Analytics. John also serves as the director of the Keenan Center for Entrepreneurship and Ethics at Lemoyne College, and he's the author of First Globals, Understanding, Managing, and Unleashing Our Millennial Generation. Also via Skype tonight from Northern Virginia, presidential historian Craig Shirley. Craig is also the president of Shirley and Bannister Public Affairs, and he is the author of Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. Gents, as always, thanks to you both for your time here tonight on Newsmax Prime. Governor John Kasich also spoke out on this newly formed alliance earlier today while on the trail in Philadelphia. Let's look and listen.
The fact is, we don't have all the resources in the world, but we're still going, and we have to husband our resources. And I feel that it's very fair for me to be able to go to areas where I can spend my resources most effectively. And the same is true for Senator Cruz. What's the big deal? We're going to go to a convention. It's going to be an open convention, and then the delegates will pick that person who can do the best in the fall. We're going to get
desperation, sir.
Me? No, I'm not desperate. Are you?
All right, this frames the question, Craig Shirley. Is this an act of desperation, or is it a shrewd move by the two campaigns?
Actually, JD, it might be both. It remains to be seen which way. This is not the first time in national politics where we've seen a stop candidate movement. In 1980, late in the primaries, there was a stop Reagan movement. In 1976, late in the primaries, there was a stop Carter movement. In 1968, late in the primaries, there was a stop Nixon movement. So this is not a new phenomenon. On the other hand, is that it remains to be seen whether or not it is a smart tactic. At least it's got people talking about other things. Although both Cruz and Kasich talk more like campaign managers or campaign strategists than making a philosophical argument against Trump. And I guess that's probably a sign of the times. But we'll see, by tomorrow, or whether or not this works or not.
Well, what is surprising, John Zogby, is that Kasich decided to suspend his campaign in Indiana. That's right next door to Ohio. I figured he would be in a better position right next door, but he steps away to concentrate on the West. Why do you think he decided to vacate the campaign, as it were, in the Hoosier state, John Zogby?
Well, interestingly, the most recent polling shows that Trump and Cruz are actually neck and neck in Indiana, and Kasich again is a distant third. And so even though it would have made sense on the surface, it wasn't making sense in reality. But this is really an act of desperation at this point. I will note Craig is absolutely right about the front-runner movements in those 3 years. All of those movements lost. So for a moment, we're playing Monopoly. And one player literally has hotels on 2/3 of the properties. One player has a couple of houses here and there on a few properties, and another guy has one house on Mediterranean Avenue. And the two latter guys say, "Come on, let's negotiate now. We can stop this guy with all the hotels." It's way too late.
Yeah, especially when we move from the analogy of a horse race to Monopoly, you figure the billionaire real estate developer is going to have an advantage when you're playing this type of game. From Donald Trump's past in real estate development to the here and now in terms of characterizing his opponents. Heretofore, Governor Kasich had evaded a nickname. I don't know if this exactly works, but today there's Donald calling John Mr. 1 for 41. Craig Shirley, should we read anything into this? Because I thought heretofore Donald had been somewhat careful, not trying to label Kasich, prompting a lot of talk about a Trump-Kasich ticket. Could that still happen despite the so-called nicknaming today?
But the circumstances are different now, because now he's joined up with Cruz, and therefore he's now in an alliance, an open alliance against Donald Trump, he and Cruz together. So the circumstances are different. So now Trump feels more liberated or freer to criticize John Kasich, which, of course, he's doing with relish, isn't he?
Well, and this is an interesting thing, and Brother Zogby, it brings us back to something we talked about early on. The Trump tone was so different from the typical presidential campaign that so many folks, and I don't want to name names, John Zogby, but so many folks said he would be done fairly early, and yet it looks like this kind of name-calling is labeling. And it's effective in terms of tying people to their nicknames, is it not?
It is working, and there's no question about the fact that it's working, and he has violated all the rules by making it work. Even now it doesn't make any sense, because Trump is going to need Ohio in a general election, and Kasich has destroyed his brand as well by, he and Cruz together, that's a very unnatural ticket. And what he did was he knocked himself down a few pegs by joining with someone that he disagrees with. Arguably, Cruz did the same thing. by joining up with Kasich. You know, those two guys just lose and lose badly and don't save face by having done what they did today, I think.
And maybe it offers a new nickname for Donald Trump to use, a little, I don't know, kinder, gentler, a little gentle nudge, the odd couple. But we'll see about that. At any rate, Miranda mentioned earlier that Donald Trump continues to win states with large delegate numbers, but Ted Cruz and his team go out and they pile up more support in the smaller states. For example, in Maine, Cruz picks up 19 of 20 delegates after originally being allotted 12. Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort was on Fox News Sunday, and now he is downplaying the Cruz delegate dealings. Let's listen in.
That's not the Trump approach. We're running the campaign to win the votes on the first ballot, and we're going to win on the first ballot. So all of this party disruption that Cruz is causing, at the end of the day, is only going to hurt the party. It's not going to hurt Trump because he's still going to have the votes cast in the first ballot, and there's going to be no second ballot, which will be very clear before the end of when the process is over on June 7th.
So is this the Paul Manafort pivot? Craig Shirley, instead of whining, saying, hey, it's all a moot point, he's going to have the delegates.
Well, I find it slightly interesting that Donald Trump's campaign manager is calling Ted Cruz divisive when everybody's been calling Donald Trump divisive for the last year. It is an interesting pivot, so I guess you're right. Look, we've said this before, is that Trump, the rules are the rules, and there's nothing underhanded, there's nothing devious, there's nothing sneaky about the state rules. Every state has their own rules for choosing their delegates, and that's federalism. That's their federalist philosophy is that that's a Republican philosophy. Instead of one size fits all, many size fit. And Trump needs to understand that if he's going to win a first ballot nomination in Cleveland.
John Zogby, final word to you, sir. 20 seconds for whatever's on your mind in this discussion.
Paul Manafort is a genius at strategizing, and so Trump whines, which works for him very well. The system is rigged against him, even though he's playing the system very well. Meanwhile, Paul Manafort goes where the delegates are, and in the big states. Bound to win Pennsylvania. He's ahead in Indiana. He's ahead in California. I was wrong.
And on that historic note, John Zogby saying I was wrong. Gentlemen, you're very much in the right for joining us, and we thank you very much for it tonight here on Newsmax Prime. This programming reminder, make Newsmax TV your one-stop source tomorrow night for all the results and reaction from those 5 East Coast primaries. Our coverage begins at 7, runs till midnight Eastern. I will follow Steve Malsberg at 8 o'clock, and we'll have phone-in numbers. You see them on your screen. Back with more after this.